that will come from it. I was asked to speak on Mary, daughter of God the Father, in a way that will introduce people to Mary, both as a loving mother and a way to the truth and the light, especially in these dark times. I will speak for about 25 minutes, so there might be enough time for a question or two at the end. The starting point this morning will be a quick story. About a year and a half ago, I was driving the country roads of my new parish assignment looking for a good fishing spot. I was coming out of one of the small towns and I noticed by the side of the road a small girl standing at the fence outside her home. She waved at me, and all I did was wave back at her, but her reaction shocked me because she started jumping up and down, her hands in the air with such abandon. I didn't know what was going on and why such a strong reaction. I thought maybe she's just a happy kid full of life. But because she was alone outside, I thought maybe she's neglected by her family and starved for attention. I didn't know, but then I started thinking about us. How often do you and I feel alone in this world? How many things do we do, especially our mistakes, because we want people to notice us? Do we not experience a certain pain in our hearts with questions that are there? Is it good that I exist? Does my life have meaning? What is this all for anyways? In 2001, then Cardinal Ratzinger explained, the crisis of fatherhood we are living today is an element, perhaps the most important, threatening man in his humanity. The dissolution of fatherhood is linked to the dissolution of our being sons and daughters. In other words, this crisis of fatherhood has caused in us an existential crisis, a crisis of identity. As Pope Benedict in 2013, he would go even more in depth by saying, even imagining God as a father becomes problematic, not having had adequate models of reference. For those who have had the experience of an overly authoritarian and inflexible father, or an indifferent father lacking in affection, or even an absent father, it is not easy to think of God as Father and trustingly surrender oneself to Him. But the biblical revelation helps us overcome these difficulties, telling us about a God who shows us what it truly means to be a father. God is a father who never abandons his children, a loving father who supports, helps, welcomes, forgives, saves, with a fidelity that immensely surpasses that of men, opening up to an eternal dimension. The love of God never fails, never tires of us. It is a love that gives to the extreme, even to the sacrifice of His Son. Faith gives us this certainty, which becomes a sure rock in the construction of our lives, so that we can face those moments of difficulty and danger, experience those times of darkness, crisis, and pain. End of quote. We need this good news desperately, because the crisis of fatherhood has bred men who are either wimps or wolves. And it has bred women who are either doormats or battering rams. On a large-scale cultural level, we are witnessing a new normal of an empty manhood and a malformed womanhood. Women have been asking, where are the real men? And many of them, fed up with not getting an answer, decide, that's it, I'm just going to do it all myself. Men are usually just standing around, shrugging their shoulders in confusion, asking, what's going on? What's the problem here? We know the sin of Adam and Eve was one of disobedience. Do not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But they did. Yet why did they fall into this sin? They believed a lie. And the heart of the lie is the deception that God doesn't truly care about them. Somehow He's holding back something from them unfairly. In other words, they were made to believe that God is not loving or merciful and that His word and His providence cannot be trusted. They were convinced that they must reach out and grab what they want, what they believe they should have and they deserve. A lie. The crisis of fatherhood, thus, is not something new. St. John Paul II said, original sin attempts to abolish fatherhood, destroying its rays which permeate the created world, placing in doubt the truth about God who is love, and leaving man only with a sense of the master-slave relationship. End of quote. Even the fall of the angels testifies to a rejection of the fatherhood of God. St. Faustina, in her diary, says, one of the most beautiful spirits would not recognize your mercy, and blinded by his pride, he drew others after him. To accept the Father requires humility and trust. Picture a scene where there's a little girl playing at home and notices for the first time the electrical outlet in the wall. She begins to wonder what this is and makes her way towards it. The father, who is there with her, looking over her with love, warns her not to put her finger in the socket because it will hurt her. If she takes her gaze off of the father, the likelihood is that her temptation will increase and her curiosity will probably get the best of her. And what her father's words were unable to convince her of, the pain of the shock surely will. That's when the real test comes. Will she allow herself to be taken up once again into the loving arms of her father? If not, she could despair or end up hardened, stubborn in her rebelliousness, all to the sadness of the father who longs for their loving communion to resume and move forward. Every time you and I are tempted or fall into sin, it's basically the same dynamic. Trusting in God's providence protects us from harm. But when we do mess up, we should never doubt His loving mercy. Again, St. John Paul II mentions how the prodigal son is every human being, bewitched by the temptation to separate himself from his father in order to lead his own independent